There is a horrifying story that just came out of Georgia. The story is that two homosexual men have been charged with using their adopted children to record child pornography. These guys are William and Zachary Zulock. They have the same name. I assume they're not brothers, so I don't know what one guy took the other guy's name, I guess. They adopted two kids, and then they used the kids to make child pornography. Not the first time we've heard this story. This story, even though gay marriage has not existed as a concept for more than 7 years, really, and not at the national level, even though gay adoption is still illegal in a whole lot of places, and it's a very novel concept, we keep hearing these stories. It's kind of weird. There's another story. They tell you these stories, they don't happen. It's one in a bazillion. Well, I don't know. There's another story came around from Queensland. This story, oh gosh, this is awful. The headline. This is in Yahoo News. He was a child star, but for all the wrong reasons. He made his debut at just 22 months old, not for a toy store advertisement or even a family-friendly PG film. This was for hardcore global pornographic syndication. He was filmed being sexually abused by his adoptive parents, quote unquote, and at least 8 other pedophiles in Australia, France, Germany, and the United States. His horrific introduction to the insidious world of pedophilia dated back to 2005, when his Russian mother sold him for $8,000 to a member of Boy Lovers, a sophisticated global network of men whose sexual preference for boys aged between 6 and 8 years old. The boy was adopted, quote unquote, by American Mark J. Newton, who lived in Brisbane, and his Australian boyfriend, Peter Trong. Now, what's really crazy about this story is that there had previously been a puff piece about this couple, a puff piece about how wonderful it was that they adopted this boy. Because this is 2013 now, the idea of gay adoption was really pretty much unthinkable at that point. And so there was this big puff piece being pushed by the liberal media to say, look, they've overcome so many obstacles, legal and social, to finally have their fulfillment, to adopt their child and form this family despite the constraints of nature and society. That article is even referenced in this article on their crimes. Look how it turned out. Didn't turn out great. The conclusion from this, and I know a lot of squishes aren't going to want to say it, homosexual adoption is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea, and it's, I think, just simply unsupportable. You can't, it's just unacceptable. Not because every kid who's adopted by homosexuals is going to be abused. I don't think that's the case. We are seeing a lot of stories like this. It's pretty weird, but that's not even the base reason why. The base reason why is that men and women are different. And I got a little baby at home right now. Let me tell you something. Little baby reacts very differently to mama than he does to daddy. Even my older son, who's a little bit older than the newborn, reacts very differently to mommy than he does to daddy. Wants different things from mommy. Because men and women are different. If you believe that men and women are different, I don't see how you can support homosexual adoption. Because men and women have different things to offer. And when we're talking about adoption, especially when we're talking about conception, especially when we're talking about an issue like surrogacy or all these other issues that keep coming up, all we ever talk about now are the right of these men to have a child. These men don't have a right to have a child. They can't have a child together. There's a very natural scientific basis for why they can't have a child together. And now they're trying to circumvent that nature through this radical social engineering, and things don't turn out very well. The only people who we ever talk about as having rights in these cases are the couples and their deep desire to have a child. You don't have a right to have a child. I know it can be hard for people especially people who struggle with infertility, or I'm sure it's very hard for homosexuals too, who have a natural desire to have a child. That's a natural thing to want. But you don't have a right to a child. Sweet little Lisa and I even dealt with what seemed like infertility for quite some time. We didn't get our first kid right away. I can tell you, at least from a couple years' experience, I know how intense that pain can be. But you do not have a right to a child. You don't. The only person who can be said to have any rights when we're talking about procreation, when we're talking about adoption or anything like that, the only person who can be said to have any rights is the child. A child has a right to his natural mother and father, conceived in the act in the conjugal act between his parents in a marriage. Marriage, which is the lifelong bond between a man and a woman for the sake of the generation and education of children. That's what it's for. And when you start tinkering with that, things go really, really awry. The inability of these two men to have a child is a kind of, I'm sure it was a pain. I mean, these guys are just absolute criminals who are going to rot. But for other people, it is a pain. Pain is not always a bad thing. Pain is not an evil thing. Suffering is not exactly an evil thing. It's kind of just a fact of life. What determines good or evil is how you react to pain, how you react to suffering. Sometimes pain can be even a good thing because it tells you that you should maybe alter your behavior. When you put your hand on the hot stove burner and it hurts, that pain tells you, okay, I got to take my hand away. There are all sorts when you're in a rut in your life, you feel a kind of pain. That tells you you've got to change certain things. All sorts of personal behaviors. When you feel a kind of pain, you're drinking too much, whatever, you've got to change that behavior. Unfortunately, in our therapeutic culture and in our culture that establishes the domination of technology to break off all natural constraints, all we tend to do is numb the pain. So you're in a rut in your life, well, just take a bunch of depression drugs. And then that's not solving the problem. That's not encouraging behavior that's more conducive to human flourishing. It's just kind of numbing the pain a little bit. You don't change a damn thing. That is and it goes even beyond sex. It goes even beyond questions of adoption. It goes down to a fundamental issue of how we as human beings react to one another and to our society and to technology. We seem to be entering into a brave new world. You know, there are two very famous dystopian novels written in the 20th century about the future. 1984 by George Orwell and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. In 1984 says that the tyrannical government's just going to beat you with a stick all the time. Brave New World says the tyrannical government is going to ply you with drugs and sex and promiscuity and all sorts of pleasures. Both are going to make you into slaves. We're getting a little bit of both in our society today. It's clearly accelerating. On the personal front, on the cultural front, on the destruction of the family, and ultimately on the political front too. The powers that be are sicking federal law enforcement on their political opponents. Things happen slow and gradually, then they can happen really, really fast. We might be in the fast stage. Right now, go to epicwill.com, use code Knowles. The left's persistent and loud attack on the truth is aimed directly at your children. You see it in the public school system. You see it in the mainstream kids' entertainment. You see it on social media platforms. Seemingly all of our nation's cultural institutions have been infiltrated by the left's not-so-secret agenda, as they say, to indoctrinate your kids with anti-religious, anti-American ideologies. They prey on the vulnerability and malleability of your kids' brains, and they seek to warp your kids' understanding of themselves and their environment. There are a lot of ways you can protect your kids from these not-so-secret agendas. You can homeschool, you get them involved in your church, but one of the easiest and simplest ways to protect your kids is to take 5 minutes tonight and write a will with Epic Will. A will gives you the power to say who will raise your kids should something, God forbid, happen to you and your spouse. It can, in certain cases, be the only legal defense standing between your kids and the persistent power grabs from the left. Epic Will is an online will platform, costs less than your next trip to Target. They can set you up with a will in as little as 5 minutes, starts at just $119. Plus, you can save 10% when you go to epicwill.com. Use code Knowles. Take 5 minutes tonight, write a will ensuring that your kids will be raised the way that you would intend in the event that something happens to you. Go to epicwill.com. Use code Knowles today. I'm so glad you liked that clip. Now, hold up, stop. You got to ring that bell. We've hit 1 million subscribers. That's great. Thrilled about that. We need to hit 1 billion. Okay, we have to. We have no other choice. So ring that bell, subscribe, get the notifications. We'll see you next time.